There's a house built out of stone, wooden floors, walls, and window sills, tables and chairs warmed by all of the dust. This is a place where I don't feel alone. This is a place where I feel at home.
So I'm Michell Stanley. I am the founder and the executive director of Moksha Living, which is a holistic psychotherapy and life coaching practice in Washington, D.C. and in Los Angeles. And what we do is we help people to liberate themselves from that which is holding them back, which is actually your mind and your mindset. And how we do that is by combining psychotherapy and life coaching with holistic services like yoga, mindfulness, and meditation. So I am really excited to be here with you all in ACD today. And what we're going to be doing today is we're going to be hearing from professional fighters regarding mental health awareness. And we're also going to be hearing from mental health therapist, Dr. Shareefah Al Uqdah, and Amin Watson, and Dr. Mercedes Ebanks. So I'm really excited to get us kicked off. And we're going to start by hearing from the first African-American female fighter, UFC, Mrs. Angela Overkill Hill. And before we hear from Angela, let's take a look at her highlight reel.
My name is Angela Hill, and I fight at strawweight at 115.
Hand laid by Hill. Elite Great covering up. Knees by Hill.
I'm an Invicta FC champion.
Hard right by Hill.
I was one of the first strawweights to be signed to the UFC. Also one of the first black women to be signed to the UFC. And the first black woman to headline a main event in the UFC.
Overkill trying to get the win right here.
Awesome. What a great highlight reel, Angela. And okay, good, I can see you now. So that was such a great highlight reel. And so I just wanted to ask you, in your experience as the first African-American woman in UFC fighting, what challenges and obstacles did you have to overcome? And how did those affect your mental health?
Hey, nice to meet you, or nice to see you again. Being the first African-American anything is always a little scary. You know, you want to represent, you want to not just show how good you are, but show how good you as a people are. I feel like we all have a lot of generational trauma that we hold on to. And what it leads to is a lot of us wanting to be the best at what we do, even better, 3 times better than the best person who does it. So when you go into a sport, you try to be as perfect as possible. So I've always been a hard worker. I've always, really gone out there and tried to do the best of what I did, never cut any corners. And eventually you hit a block. Eventually you hit a wall where it's hard to be continually successful. So just a little background. I started my career as a kickboxer, as a Muay Thai fighter, went undefeated. And then my first pro MMA fight, I won and ended up getting signed to the UFC. So I'm in the UFC with 1 pro MMA fight, and I'm fighting girls with a lot more experience than me. And I still did well, I still did really well for myself, but I ended up not being perfect. And it was really hard for me to accept not being perfect. And anytime I got a loss, it was just really hard thing. And I feel like it was harder because I had this pressure, I had these expectations, and I just wanted to make everyone proud, that I think that's the hardest part of being an athlete. And losing is you feel like you let down your coaches, your family, your friends. And for me, I felt like I let down my race, every time I'd step out there and it didn't come out the way I wanted to. So that I think that was the hardest thing to overcome. That and realizing the world wasn't rooting for me. Coming from PG County is really close to you guys out in DC. I felt like I was a bit sheltered when it came to the world view of Black people in America. So once I got into college, I'm just like, oh, wow, things are a little different here. Like people believe in the stereotypes and they think that I'm a certain way, and they're surprised that I actually have layers to my personality. And then, the same thing happened when I went into the MMA world. Suddenly people are rooting against me, or people don't think I deserve to be there, or they think I'm there as a result of affirmative action. And that's always been really tough for me too, just knowing that people weren't seeing my successes blindly. They always had, it was always loaded because of the color of my skin. So those are the things that the mental health things that have to do with, I think, being the first of anything in a field, or achieving the first of anything. But then there's all the other stuff that just comes with being a fighter and being an athlete in general. There's so much, when it comes to the performance anxiety, wanting to train even though you shouldn't because your body hurts, letting people into your circle that you maybe shouldn't have. There's a lot of things that go with just being in the limelight and being a fighter that anyone can relate to. So I think all those things are now being focused on a little bit more when it comes to sports. You have sports psychiatrists, you have mental coaches, but it's definitely a very new field. So I'm happy that things like your program exist, because we need more of it and we need more accessibility to it.
Thank you. I think that's such a robust answer. I like what you shared about, competition is going to bring about comparison, and being the first, you're always comparing yourself, right, to those that have been there before you. And it sounds like, people that weren't rooting for you, you're always looking to the outside and probably comparing yourself and being compared. And so I'd love to hear, what did you see other people with challenges or going through their own challenges with mental health as you went through these things?
Definitely. I didn't mention this yesterday, but I've had, mental health, mental illness in my family. My brother, he was diagnosed bipolar schizophrenic when he was 21. And then I have also addiction in a lot of my family. I think everyone can relate to that. And these are things that people sometimes don't see as illnesses. They see it as someone acting up, or someone, being hard-headed or not taking things seriously, when in fact they are mentally ill and they need help. They need professional help. And I think things have gotten better now, but it was a challenge when we were younger, just like finding help, or when I was younger, finding help for my brother. So it's like, I'm happy the way that things are going now, that people are being more open about mental health issues, and being more open about it in sports too. I've had a few people in the fight world, like, commit suicide, or people who weren't diagnosed properly and ended up doing something that ended up getting them killed. You hear about it a lot in the sports world with CTE now. There's talks of that having a lot to do with your mental health and just, creating issues that weren't there before just because of brain damage. So it's really good that people are focusing on it now more, because it was really untapped maybe 20 years ago. It was an untapped field. People didn't take mental illness as seriously, especially in the Black community. I think it's more because you couldn't afford to a lot of times. Like, you couldn't afford to take it seriously. You just had to push through. Like that's like the motto a lot of times. Just push through the trauma, push through the hard times, and eventually, you'll come out on top. But it's not always that easy. So yeah, I think whenever I hear anything about mental health awareness, I'm excited about it, because I've been affected. Lots of people that I know have been affected, and it really is important to deal with it, even if you don't feel like you have a mental illness, or you're not really that far in the spectrum. Like it's a thing that you need. Like we were saying before, you have your coaches for nutrition, you have your coaches for boxing and jiu-jitsu and like grappling, wrestling, but mental coaching is something a little more rare that I think more people need to embrace just to get through the day. It's a crazy world right now. And man, I can't even look at Twitter without wanting to call a therapist. So it's really important just to address it and not just shove things down, because that's when you start getting those more serious effects, those effects of stress, anxiety, and all those things.
Absolutely. And I love how you shared that, at the time and even presently, there's not a lot of resources or support. And even if there is, there's a stigma around connecting to mental health services. And what you're told to do is just push through, which may or may not be, the best advice. So I'd love to hear if you have, some tips or tools that can help other people, specifically other UFC fighters, or specifically African-American women, to overcome mental health challenges.
Well, it used to work for me, but now I need other stuff. But hitting things helped. And not just hitting things, but working out, breaking a sweat, using your body in the way that it was designed to be used. A lot of times we get stuck in these jobs where we can't really move around. We don't have time to move around. We don't have anything really pushing us to sweat. And before I was a fighter, I started Muay Thai, which is kickboxing. I started that because I was stressed at work and because I felt weak and small, and I didn't feel like I could, I didn't feel like I had much confidence. And being able to just get physical with something, and it could have been anything, but most of the stuff I found wasn't that fun, and I really enjoyed punching and kicking things. Who would have thought?
Well, you're right. That is actually a really good one. I mean, of course, not punching and kicking, innocent bystanders on the street, but actually hitting things or hitting a bag is actually a really great release of emotional tension, stress. It's actually really great for anger. And so, yeah, I love how you use that as an example.
Yeah, I didn't expect it would be that important to me at the time. I just tried it out for fun. And after going to my first class, I was just like, wow, this is amazing. I had those endorphins that you get after working out. It could be as simple as going for a jog in the morning. And every time you go, like I tell people all the time, don't feel bad about not wanting to go, because after you leave, you're going to be so happy that you went. You just get that rush, that natural high from being productive, from doing something. It's the same as being creative. That's another one for me. Making something that didn't exist before, being creative. It could be drawing, writing, anything, just doing something that works your brain and takes your mind off of the stuff that you have to do every day. But above all things, I think talking to people, just being open about how you're feeling. And you can find someone who you don't know that well, or you can find someone who you really trust, just anybody who's willing to listen and not even give you advice, but just willing to let you vent and get out your frustrations, because a lot of times you'll just be sitting there angry one day and you won't really know why. And when you either write it down or talk it out, you get to work through why you're angry and why you're feeling a certain way. I've never tried therapy before, but I feel like a lot of that is part of it. Just the talking aspect is probably the most helpful part of it. But those are my home remedies, I guess, for mental health. Like those things have gotten me through a lot of rough times, just talking things out, writing it down, figuring out why I'm feeling a certain way. And it could just help you from going from frustration to figuring out maybe a solution, or figuring out how to just get through the next moment.
I love that. And I think those sound pretty close to what a mental health professional would say as well, Angela. So I think you did pretty good. Yes. Thank you. Thank you so much. And just to review some of the things that you shared so that our audience can capture them. So, we've got using your body. And I think that you're saying that you just don't want to keep it in, but you want to like get it out, even if it's punching, if it's exercising, if it's hitting, if it's moving. And then I love that idea about creating. That's a way to take something that's inside of you and like put it to the outside world so you can share it and can transform. So that's like super inspiring. And then I love just like talking to people. It doesn't have to be a therapist, just talking to other people. So next we're going to hear some tips from mental health therapist, Dr. Shareefah Al Uqdah. And so we'll go ahead and bring Dr. Uqdah on, and I'll let her introduce herself, and then we'll get into hearing some tips from her.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Dr. Shareefah Al Uqdah. I'm a licensed psychologist located in Washington, D.C. And I currently am also a professor at Howard University. And my not-for-profit is called Your Neighborhood Clinic. Thank you, athletes. Thank you, Phil. Thank you, Angela, for sharing your stories. I think that you all have really highlighted a lot of the ways in which anxiety shows up for everyone, but also athletes specifically. It's very important to know that anxiety is one of the most common mental health illnesses that individuals will be diagnosed with throughout their lifetime. It is also important to know that the seeds of anxiety, and quite frequently anxiety disorders, can be diagnosed within children. Issues such as mutism or separation anxiety is quite frequent in children. And so a lot of times individuals may have the precursor of anxiety, which may build up as they continue throughout their life. One of the things that Phil and Angela talked about also that is important when understanding anxiety is sort of that pre-existing trauma that may exist, where you have begun to think about things in a way that they have described as this pressure. And so all of a sudden, the excessive fear and worry about failure, about evaluation, about not being good enough can sort of capsize our otherwise mental health and create an anxiety disorder. One of the things that Phil's story pointed out was the idea that anxiety very frequently is coupled with avoidance. So individuals will no longer want to show up, want to complete activities. They may stay away from friends and families that they once enjoyed, competitions, exercises that they once enjoyed. In addition, anxiety may frequently be coupled with physical symptoms. So the normal sweaty hands that Michelle talked about may be maxed if you're an athlete because you're frequently sweating, right? You're constantly sweating, you're constantly exerting your body, but the mental parts of that excessive worry and anguish about a future outcome will arise. One of the things that I also want to point out in terms of anxiety is that anxiety differs from normal transient fear, right? Like you may have a thought like, oh my God, should I get on this roller coaster? That is different from actual anxiety, where it can be crippling and debilitating, and is oftentimes persistent and lasts for long periods of time. Anxiety may also occur with other disorders such as depression, such as PTSD, and some of the other disorders that you all may be familiar with. When we're thinking about how to cope and how to manage anxiety, it's very important that you engage in what I just generally call good wellness routine, right? So we want a good sleep hygiene. We want a good social support, which the athletes talked about. We also want to make sure that we are eating well, but also engaging in activities such as exercise, such as deep breathing and relaxation that we know helps calm the body. Second, when we are talking about treating and working with anxiety, we want to make sure that we unpack our mental story. What is the story that we tell ourselves about what is happening? Phil sort of alluded to this idea of the therapist helping him figure out what was real and fake. Because the thought is that Phil probably had created a story of failure, a story of not being able to succeed, a story of everyone abandoning him and no longer thinking that he can do these things. And so when you're dealing with anxiety, you really do want to work on that mental story that you have created about the future, knowing that the future isn't written yet. So you are perfectly able to write and have the story that you want. And I always tell my clients, if you are the author of your story, you might as well write yourself being the winner, right? You might as well write yourself coming out on top. You might as well write yourself being the victorious one. And so a lot of anxiety works around thinking about that story that you tell yourself, as well as developing behaviors that will support your overall wellness. If any of you all are experiencing anxiety in any shape, form, of course, reach out for a therapist, but also engage of some of those practices that we talked about. Again, good hygiene, good social support, engaging in physical activity that includes not only exercise, but deep breathing. You can also purchase a lot of anxiety workbooks that will walk you through the steps to unpack your stories and unpack some of the way that you may be imagining the future. And I think that is my time.
Yes, thank you, Dr. Shareefah. That was just so much of a wealth of valuable information, and I think that you really, nailed some of these ideas and theories down to help people understand what they're experiencing, what anxiety might look like. And I think that, from what you shared, we understand that anxiety can be almost a reaction to a stressor. And it also can be a combination of a reaction to a stressor where your mind creates a story and almost makes the situation elevated or puts more pressure on the situation. I think you gave a really great description of all the ways that effect. I'm not even going to say those symptoms, because I really want to make sure that we destigmatize mental health and mental health, conditions, because it doesn't necessarily mean that you have a disorder. Anxiety is a way of relating to stress. And I think what we're learning from this conversation today is that we all experience stress. Even the people that, are champion fighters and that have had a ton of success experience anxiety, even if it doesn't look like it on the outside. So thank you so much.
Thank you. And I just want to add real quick that just because this keeps coming up, this idea of pressure, right? So a lot of times we think that pressure is motivating us, right? Like we need the pressure in order to be motivated. But what research says is that there's a limit to that. that once you reach a level of so much pressure, what happens is you actually break down. Think about a car, right? If you continue to rev the engine, that gasket is going to blow. It's going to go hot. And we are the same way. So I always encourage us to be motivated by good things, right? I am motivated to train this hard because it feels good for my body. I am motivated to compete because I enjoy competing. I am motivated to perform and to show up because it actually feels good for me, as opposed to letting pressure be a motivating factor, because you never know when that pressure is going to be too much. Thank you. And I'm Dr. Shareefah.
Yes, yes. Thank you, Dr. Shareefah. And I think that we saw that both in Angela and in Phil's story. And the people think that once you become successful, or once you hit that level of achievement that you've been striving for, that the anxiety or the pressure or the stress will actually become less. And so I love that you shared that, because I think both Angela and Phil's story shared that, you know, almost once they got to that level, that they might have crossed that threshold where the stress actually and the pressure became more, and it you know, created